If people could lower their payment, would they? Yes. If they could lower their interest rate, would they? Yes. If they could pay it off faster, would they? Yes. And if they could move non-deductible interest to deductible interest, would they do it? Yes. Hello. This is the Impact School of Money, where our mission is to change the way that people are educated on money. This is episode 14. The purpose of the Impact School of Money is to learn real-world rules of money. Purpose number 2 is to learn how different concepts, products, and approaches work in the financial industry. And then purpose number 3 is how those things apply to life. Now we're going to jump into how something works. And today we're going to be talking about debt and how debt works. So hopefully camera's working, sound is working, everything's working. Okay, so sometimes people will ask me as I meet with them or I go over different principles, especially a guy I was meeting with recently. He looked at me and he said, you seem pretty young. What gives you the credibility to be telling me any of this? And that's a fair question. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of background on me, so I've been in the financial industry for 13 and a half years. June of 2005 was when I joined the financial industry. And today is not meant, or any of these Impact School of Money episodes are not meant to talk about my firm or my company, but to provide value for the people that are either listening to this now or will be listening to this recording in the future. That we've noticed just a massive gap in the theory that we may learn or the opinions, so the theory we learn in school or the opinions of grown-ups in our lives as we grow up on their opinions and thoughts on money. But there's what people think and what actually works. And so the reason that we started doing the Impact School of Money is from 13 and a half years in the industry, seeing what people have done that works, seeing what people have done that doesn't work. Do those theories really apply? Do the lessons that mom and dad teach really work, or was it just their scenario, their unique circumstance? And so the purpose of the Impact School of Money is to teach how money works and change the way that people are educated, or really just give them the education in general. And so we have multiple subjects, multiple topics, and what we're going to be talking about today in how it works is debt. And so it's not the most exciting thing for people to talk about, but it is something that people have. And those that have it, do they like it? And how do they feel about their debt? And yes, there are times where we do have to go into debt in our lives, but by being more prepared, as odd as this sounds, being more prepared to be in debt or to get into smarter debt, potentially if we need to, versus less smart debt. Really, in reality, we don't want any debt. All debt would be bad, but if there are circumstances, a car, a home, that needs to happen, then it needs to happen. So the thing that we're going to talk about today specifically is when people have debt, what do people hate about debt the most? If we have debt, probably the number one thing that I've seen that people hate the most about their debt is they say it's the interest, because that's what they're told to say. And they want to get out of debt as fast as humanly possible, and again, because that's what all the books say to do, and how they're supposed to feel and all that stuff. But really, when it comes to our monthly budget, most people, when they think about it, would agree that just having all of these payments that go to nothing is probably the thing that's the most annoying. There's just this payment that I have to pay that reduces what I can do better things with my money, is just going off to something that I got or did or bought a long time ago. And if I don't manage it right, that payment just keeps going and going and going and going and going to that same place, potentially forever. Okay. Number two, another thing that people are looking at when it comes to their debt is the interest that they're paying on the debt. Is if I you can kind of compare it, and we did this in a real world rule of money. If I compare it to, the pile of money I have is, maybe the payment I'm going to make, but then the whole is my total debt. When I throw this dirt in here, it only fills up the hole by a little bit. But if the interest that I'm being charged on the debt is 15, 18, 22%, I've seen 30+%, well, then the hole, gets deeper, and a lot of the time it's getting deeper faster than I can fill it. And so interest is another one. Third is people's focus, so they've got a payment, they've got interest, and they want to eliminate or reduce or pay off the debt as fast as possible. And then number four, when it comes to debt, is looking at where and how my payment, if at all, is helping me even a little bit. And so that's going to be determined by whether the interest that we're paying on our debt is deductible, and I don't know if it's deductible or deductible, but it doesn't matter, because I'm the teacher at the Impact School of Money, so today, even if it's wrong, it's deductible. I'm pretty sure that's what it is anyway. I grew up in a farming community, so they didn't teach us how to spell that. Great. Okay, so if this is somebody's situation and they have debt, they have payments, they have interest, they are paying it off, it's slower than they want, and they're looking at their payments and saying, well, is my interest deductible or is it not deductible? Well, let's talk about that and how potentially are some ways to make that happen. So, first of all, a payment. Different debts calculate payments in different ways. So you have installment loans, you have revolving loans, you have interest-only payments. There's multiple ways the payments are figured out. The payment on a mortgage is figured out very differently than a payment on a credit card. The payment on a car is calculated very differently than that, say, to a student loan. And so different debts have different payment configurations. And as we go into the debt section of the Impact School of Money over the next several episodes, is we'll talk about different debts specifically. But today it's just going to get an overall big view of debt and what are things to be focusing on when we're looking at our debt. And so simply put, and tell me true or not true, if there are ways that people could lower their payments, would they? Would that make them excited? Obviously it would. But there's always, that voice in the back of our head, that other voice is like, well, yes, I would like to lower my payments, but what does that do to paying off my debt? Or if I lower my payment, how does the interest, affect it? Because just my payment's lower, but the interest is the same. Doesn't that pay me off, way further down the road, right? But if they could lower their payment, just keeping it to the payment, let's just think about the payment. If people could lower their payment, would they? I was like, well, yeah, obviously. Okay. Next is going to be if there was a way they could lower their interest, would people do that? And the answer, of course, is yes. If they could accelerate the payoff, would people do that? Well, definitely. And if they have the choice between deductible and non-deductible interest, which would they pay? And people are like, well, what does that mean? If you go back to through the Impact School of Money episodes, there's a conversation around taxes that talk about what that means, but it's basically just interest is able to be deducted from your annual income. You make $100,000 of income, you have all your deductions. One of those deductions happens to be the interest you're paying to certain debt, and let's say that certain debt is $10,000 of interest, and that brings our taxable income down to $90,000 because it's deductible interest minus our other deductions. But if it was non-deductible interest and we're paying $10,000 to it, then it doesn't take us down to 90. We're still at 100 that we would pay taxes on minus our other deductions. Okay, so again, if people could lower their payment, would they? Yes. If they could lower their interest rate, would they? Yes. If they could pay it out faster, would they? Yes. And if they could move non-deductible interest to deductible interest, would they do it? Yes. So we're going to spend the next several episodes talking about how to do that, because all of those things are possible, but it just depends on the situation. So how are some ways that payments can be lowered? It depends on where it is, but one that people hate the most, so we'll talk about that, is we'll talk about credit cards. Let's say that I have 4 credit cards, all different interest rates, all different payments. Okay, there are places, ways, and resources where one of the ones that a lot of people that I talk to use is creditcards.com. So if you go to creditcards.com, you can shop through different credit cards and find different cards with different payment calculations, where let's say that the minimum payment due is 2%. So if I look at the 4 payments on these cards and my total payment is $400, but by consolidating all of them to one card with this payment, if it lowers my payment, then that's a way to lower the payment. Or if I'm shifting from one type of debt to another. So let's say, for example, that I have, and a lot of people do this, and you've heard of people doing this, where they refinance their house and they pull equity from the home to pay off credit cards, cars, etc. Well, if the focus 100% is lowering payments, then because of how mortgage debt is calculated compared to credit cards and cars, it lowers payments. But does it reduce interest payments, pay off quicker, and move interest to deductible interest? Not always, or not all 3. But depending on how the payment is calculated, is in all the families that I've met with, there's almost always a way to restructure payments if payment is the #1 most important thing. But that's why kind of zooming out and looking at the full thing is so important, is because there are ways really to do all 4 at the same time as it relates to other things we're doing financially. So by consolidating a lot of the time, so those would be kind of the two different points here to lower payments. One is going to be to consolidate, which basically is taking multiple debts and combining them into one, which a lot of the time will lower the payment. Okay, the second way would be basically making a shift from one type of debt to another. So if it's all consumer debt, moving it from consumer debt to maybe, consolidating with, a personal loan or a car or a mortgage or a home equity line of credit and all those things. But again, it's not just a, hey, do this and do it. It would always make sense to work with a competent financial consultant to make sure that it makes sense and makes sense for someone's situation. Okay, with interest is an interesting thing to talk to people about. Is the thing that people hate the most about interest is, we're always told, don't just make the minimum payment. Don't just make the minimum payment. Well, if our interest is high, that's going to be very true, because if we only make the minimum payment, how long does it take to get out of debt? Well, it's going to take forever to get out of debt. There's some credit cards that they're designed to be 20, 25, 30 years to pay them off if we make the minimum payment only because of the interest rate. But wouldn't it be okay to pay the minimum payment, having a lower payment, if our interest was zero? Because then even by making the minimum payment, how much goes to pay it off? Well, all of it. So whether we make more of a payment or less of a payment, all of it pays it off. And so it depends on the interest rate, right? And it depends on the balance between payment and interest rate. But as we go through these episodes, is learning the different places to find and how these things relate to each other, but knowing there are places out there, whether it be by consolidating or shifting to a different type, that interest can be lowered along with a payment. Okay. Next is if we can do both of those things, lower the interest, lowering the payment. If we have lower interest than we had previously, chances of paying off a debt faster and are a lot better than paying those off. And so people do get to the point where if they have money in savings, they're saving money here, and their savings starts to increase, and their debt balances are high, and the debt balances start to decrease. There is a day where they get to this point, where what they have saved is as much as they have debt, and if this is the zero line, they'd have enough in savings compared to what they're paying their debt down, that could they write out a check and pay their debt down to zero? Yes, they could, but the question is, if they did that, what do they have now? They have nothing. And so sometimes people are so focused on paying off their debt that they get to that point, they pay it off, and then the theory is, and again, this is the theory, not human emotion or behavior or what people actually do, calculated in, is people say, well, man, as soon as I get this debt paid off, it'll free up so much money in payments that I'll just take whatever I was paying to my debt from this point, and I'll just start saving that, and I'll catch up to this line right here. Great theory. Does that happen in real life most of the time? No, it doesn't. Most of the time, people have not had the habit of saving and got on a debt plan that reduces their interest rate, still pays them off quickly, maybe gives them some tax deductions along the way, or if they just got a good, solid debt plan, put it on mostly autopilot to just let it go and start paying it off, knowing that along the way, does it really look that way? No, they're going to get down to here and they're going to have to buy a new car or get a new house, and so it'll go up and then it'll go down and then it'll go up, you know, but the general direction is going down, right? Because if they were to focus on getting that debt paid and, you know, just in a habitual way, and then savings in the same manner, then by the time the debt is paid off, look at how much money they would have here as that continues to grow. Okay? But again, it's finding that balance of, you know, how do I free up as much monthly cash flow as possible for flexibility purposes? If I want to pay extra, pay extra. If I don't, I don't. Lower my interest rates. Get on a debt program, whether it's, we'll be talking about in future episodes, debt snowball, debt acceleration, debt consolidation, debt negotiation. There's a whole bunch of different things that we'll be talking about in future episodes when it comes to debt. And then lastly is looking at deductible and non-deductible. And it's really, you know, just sitting down, whether you're sitting down with yourself or you're sitting down you're in the industry and you're sitting down with a client, or you just want to teach it to your kids, you know, is looking at the overall situation and saying, okay, where the debt is now, I've got the debt. Obviously, the smartest thing to do would be not have debt. But if I already have it, where can it be shifted, moved, negotiated with to be more beneficial than the current place it's in, where I could get deductible interest payments, where I could get it paid off quickly, have lower interest, have lower payments, and those are the things that we'll be talking about in future episodes. But knowing that from real-world experience, being able to sit down with families, one that I met with yesterday in Texas. I didn't go to Texas yesterday, and I'm not in Texas, but over a webinar where we were able to lower their payments, lower their interest rates, and that was through consolidation and a debt elimination plan. We will be able to take some of the freed up money from payments, and because the interest is lower, and apply about $250 extra to their overall debt plan, which got them out of debt in 12 years, and right now they're on track to be out of debt in 22. And then we moved all except for about $3,000 of their debt to a tax-deductible position to where the interest they were paying was higher. Now it's a little bit lower. They're still paying interest, but the interest they're paying is now a deductible interest payment. So the purpose of this kind of to be an introduction to our debt section of the Impact School of Money to look at these things and say, man, how cool would it be to learn how to do all those things? And that's what we'll be teaching over the next several episodes. Who knows? Maybe it goes the entire month of November. In September, Life Insurance Awareness Month, we spent an entire month talking about life insurance twice a week for 30 minutes twice a week for an entire month. And so who knows, that's what we spend on it. But again, it's to educate and help you understand how debt works compared to other pieces of your overall financial plan. So thank you for joining us today at the Impact School of Money. Class dismissed.